Hello there, one and all, and welcome to episode 10 of our masterclass series here on the Persolaise YouTube channel. This is a series where, if you've been a regular viewer of them, you will know we delve a little bit more deeply into some of the issues related to perfumery as an industry. We've been looking over the course of the last several months now at ingredients, at specific ingredients, where they've been coming from. And today is actually going to be the final episode of this particular run of looking at ingredients. Don't worry, we will have more masterclasses coming your way at some point. And in fact, if you would like to send me some ideas of the sorts of things that you would like to see covered in this masterclass format, please feel free to send me a message. But joining me again in the virtual studio from southeastern France, we have Remi Pulverail of Les Indemodables, who is going to be talking us through today through Osmanthus and Clary Sage. But first of all, I know it's too late to wish you a Happy New Year, Remi, because we are in February now, but I will still say Happy New Year. How are you doing?
Fine, very fine. Not really southeast of France, but central east of France.
Okay, apologies. I must get French geography right.
Yeah, we are close to the Swiss border.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And I should know because I've been there. So I should know where I've gone. Lots of people tuning in already. So thank you very much for joining us. We've got Lucas watching from Prague. David is in Los Angeles. Who else have we got? We've got Lynn, who is saying hello from the rainstorm of the year in Los Angeles. Trina is watching from Connecticut in the USA. Eric is in Texas. And we have somebody else from Connecticut. That's interesting. If you are going to put a question to Remi, and by all means feel free to ask a question, it's always nice to know where it is that you're watching from. Okay, so Remi, we are going to focus on the two ingredients, but we may also finish at the very end with a kind of general summary of where things stand with ingredients. But we will keep our focus on Osmanthus and Clary Sage. Why Osmanthus and Clary Sage? Because they feature in your cuir de Chine, your Chinese leather, and those are the two ingredients that you've paired together in your ingredients box that you made, where for several of your perfumes you've basically done pairs of natural materials. I believe this box is still available. I know you did a sort of limited run of it in the UK. It's available through the Saint Cellier website. Well worth trying. And we've been talking a lot about anything interesting to do with how these materials are produced, or what problems there are in production, what problems there are in sourcing, what problems there are in developing relationships with the people who provide us with these materials. So let us go all the way to China for Osmanthus. So tell us a little bit about Osmanthus. Now, those of us who wear perfume and smell perfume are always told that Osmanthus is a very, very expensive ingredient. So is that correct?
Yeah. Alors, just to come back on a little bit on the perfume and why Osmanthus together with Clary. First, this is a bit the backbone of the creation, and second, because when we looked at the market, especially the perfume around leather, we found a lot of either classical leather but very animalic, or leather mixed with wood, but we really wanted a leather that was really soft, close to suede, and you see a nice pair of gloves rather than something very animalic. And that's interesting because in these two ingredients, Osmanthus and Clary Sage, you have the leathery facet. Alors, in Osmanthus, it's an incredible flower. For me, when I was visiting China and Yunnan in particular, this is very famous and luxury flower in China that you can see in many ceremonies, that also is sometimes mixed with tea, as you probably know. And you have this facet both of apricot and leather. And it's interesting because you have two ingredients, Dariush, with two different extraction techniques. The first is the alcola. So basically, you make the concrete, the solvent extraction. You mix with alcohol, and you do not evaporate alcohol. So you really keep all the fresh and the most volatile molecules in the extract. and you get in the Alcola really the apricot and the fruity facet. And the Alcola is not long lasting. It means it really comes on the top notes of the Cuir de Chine. And then we also used a second extract, which is the Osmanthus Absolute. So then you make the classical Absolute, so evaporating the alcohol to really concentrate the extract. And the Absolute will bring this fruity but much more leathery note in the heart and in the base note of the perfume. So you keep really the Osmanthus, you see olfactive profile from the top notes until the base note and the evaporation phase after a few hours of time. So it's really the reason
stays
why
all the way through.
Using this two extract. So Osmanthus also, it's a it's a bit a special ingredient because as you probably don't know, they proceed to first they harvest the flowers in different period because you have different region producing.
So actually, because I noticed you kind of ignored my question about why it's expensive, and I'm wondering why.
Okay, sorry.
No, but we can come back to that. We can come back to that. But if you started talking about the flower, so let's talk about the flower. I know that there are several species of Osmanthus, but apparently only some of them are useful to us in perfumery.
Yes. The most suitable are the yellow, the golden one for the extraction, because and why is it expensive? Again, because the yield, that's always the problem, or not a problem, but the reality with the flowers. Most of the time the yield are very poor, and that's why it's an expensive extract. But the thing is that the processing factories making the extract or the concrete, because in China most of the time they make the concrete, and then the Absolute is manufactured in France, enfin in Europe. The fact is the factories are far from the fields, and as you know, for all the fresh materials, flowers mainly, you need to be very close to the extraction factory. Otherwise,
so we're gonna you're making the story too quick, Remi. Just give us take it slowly, because you're gonna mention salt, aren't you?
Yes.
But let's go back to the flower, if you don't mind. Now, is it true that pretty much most of the world's Osmanthus that we use in perfumery comes from China?
Yes, of course.
Why has that happened? Is it just to do with climate and geography, or?
Yeah, I think it's a question of production capacity, and the fact that in China Osmanthus is used in many different areas, as we said, to fragrance the tea, to some ceremonies or whatever. So you see, behind the supply chain in all the countries, you see, if you take tuberose in India, the first output is not perfumery. This is the wedding. This is the tradition they have to use the flowers. So in many countries, you have first an ancient tradition, most of the time before the perfume usage. And at some point, the perfume usage came later and on the top of the initial usage that you have locally, which is the case for Osmanthus.
And I think I'm right in saying as well, because I think you told me in your notes that the Osmanthus, which, by the way, we have a question. Is it a tree or it's a bush? It's a tree, right?
A tree.
It's a tree. Okay. The tree is actually, it's quite strong, isn't it? It is quite resistant to bugs and insects. And so is that another reason why it kind of grows wild all over the place? Are most of these trees wild, or are they in?
No. These are, of course, you have wild Osmanthus, but I would say that you have mostly plantations, organized plantations. Yes.
But is that another reason why there is sort of a lot of them, because they're quite easy to maintain?
Yes, maybe, but you see, this is the situation today. We don't know.
Right.
You see, for all the plants, look at the lavender in France. 10 years ago, you didn't have the disease that we have now. So you see, things are changing. But for sure, this is quite a resistant tree. but we never know if one day there will be an insect or whatever, not enough rain or not enough, you see a change in the climate. Because basically what makes the plant weak is really the climatic disorder as well. Because when you have too much sun or too much rain or not enough humidity, the plant is getting weaker, and of course is like a human being, is getting some disease more easily. So for the time being, it's a resistant plant, which is, as we said, used in many different traditional fields and activities in China. But the problem was for perfumery that you don't distill it. And you see in China, at the time when it started to be used, you didn't have the extraction factories, because when you make a solvent extraction, it's a bit more complex. We're far from the fields. And,
so they were far from the fields, or they are far from the fields.
They are
because there was no need historically for them to be close to the fields, right?
It's I don't know all the reason of that, because it's several hundred kilometers from there. So what is interesting is that they found a way to make it, because normally if you have rose field, you need to have or jasmine field, you harvest and you need to make the extraction within half a day, maximum 4 hours. Otherwise, the flowers start to lose. So
they start going rotten almost, don't they?
Exactly. Yeah. So that's a no-brainer. This is what you need to have. Otherwise, you cannot use the flowers. So what they did in China is interesting. Is that they salted the flowers.
So they literally just, I think if people want to go online, you can see pictures of people just putting literally salt on the flowers.
Yeah. And then they macerate it in the solvent, and they can transport it and then proceed to the solvent extraction. So you see, it's a mean to keep the flowers, let's say, alive longer. But of course, Dariush, it changes a bit the olfactive profile, because you see,
absolutely, that was the question I was going to ask, because there are so many questions. Like, one question is, has anybody compared the smell of an unsalted Osmanthus with the smell of a salted Osmanthus to see if there's a difference?
Of course, it could be different, maybe less interesting. So probably some people tried it, but this is the tradition. And in fact, I discussed one time with a scientist in China that told me that I could not smell it, but that told me that the result was not as good and as performant as the one with the salted. Alors, sometimes this process, I've seen it also in Bulgaria for the roses.
Right. Because I was going to ask, is it done with any other plants?
Yes. So some old traditional plant used to do at the Sovietic time, you see, USSR time, to have this kind of process, because they were not very well organized. So it was also a way to keep the rose flowers. So it happened sometimes, but very little actually. And in China, the result after this process has been considered as very good.
Right.
So they kept it.
So it's actually become part of the personality of the product that we want.
Exactly. So, and the process.
Do you know what happens to the salt?
But
the actual salt that's on, because I'm almost like imagining some kind of like a sort of enfleurage effect, where does something go inside the salt from the flowers as well?
Then the salt, you keep it, you remove some of it, but you still have it in the flower. So it's a part of the extraction afterward, because you don't wash the flowers before making the extraction. So you see, there is a part of the salt that is mixed and kept into the flower. It's a part of the extraction process.
It is completely part of it. And then, another question, because you tell us a story like this where there are so many obvious questions that come up. Like Rachel is saying, why don't they now build factories close to the... I mean, I suppose they don't want to, because even if they did, they would still want to use the salt, right? Because
yes, because now you have some closer factories, even if you don't have so many, because you see Osmanthus for perfumery remains a very niche product. So you see it's not a big market because it's an expensive product, first. Second, because the big perfume house don't use it much now because of the price. In our perfume, we use really a very high percentage, but I mean the global market for perfumery is not increasing. So you see, there is not many investment to try to make it more. That's always the question. Is it worth to invest $1 million or a few million in a new factory very close to the field to make a process that until today is considered as working well?
Fine. Yes. Yeah. It doesn't need to be fixed. Yeah.
Yeah. For a market which is at the end of the day rather decreasing, at least for perfumery, than increasing.
And you keep telling us, we know that it's expensive. You've told us it's expensive. How expensive is it? How much does it cost to get?
But the absolute cost a few thousand euros a kg, you see. So, depending on the crop condition or whatever. But you see,
when you say because that may not necessarily mean very much to us. So when you say a few thousand, give us like a comparison with rose or jasmine.
It's not very far. It's between 2,000 and 3,000 euro the kg for the around 3,000 euro for the absolute, which is not very far from the rose absolute. So you see, because you have more or less the same kind of yields, so we are in the same price range, more or less, depending on the conditions, but more or less it's comparable.
So I need to be careful because I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert on global politics. I'm not an expert on international politics. I don't want to offend anybody watching. I don't want to say the wrong thing, and both of us don't want to say the wrong thing. But from our perspective here in Britain, from the perspective of some of the news reports that we get that come from like the American news channels, over the course of the last few years, this story has been developing of China being a country that is being more and more difficult to work with, more and more difficult to deal with, a country that kind of seems to be maybe closing its borders a little bit. Have you found that? I mean, because I presume you are dealing directly with a Chinese supplier.
Yeah. No, really, that's not where is the issue in China. In China today, the issue, I would say, is more with the rural exodus. You see,
people leaving the rural areas,
the countryside. This is the major issue for China, both for food commodities and for the product of interest for us. But you see, the young generation, and they have a huge. They need such a big quantity of food, crops, and the rest. It's very difficult to keep people in the countryside. And that's why there is still now quite an important increase in many natural extract coming from China because they have this problem of labor force on the agricultural side.
And that seems to be a problem in so many parts of the world. I mean, even in your own country, in France, on your doorstep,
You're right, Darius. It's a global problem that we will have to address, and especially when we talk about these. For me, we talk about it a few sessions before, but you see, for me, the future of agriculture. At least for our crops, but also for some food crops, is the family farming system. You see, it means not the industrial and very large scale crops. You need it for some very big commodities like wheat, like many a product that people need in very large volume. But for most of the vegetables, of the fruits, I really believe in the large, small or medium scale farming system. First, that will keep the farmers independent, because you know that when agriculture becomes huge, it becomes a big company. So it means that the farmers become employees of this big company. So in all the system and the places where I go, I see that the best performing models are really the one that keep a human size. You see, in terms of planting acreage, in terms of management of the farm, and not really becoming totally industrial.
No, and you could apply that to so many things. Keeping things human sized. You could apply it to education. Well, anyway, we won't go down that route. Couple more questions on Osmanthus, and I was kind of conscious that even though we've been doing this series now for quite some time, there's one issue that I don't think I've spoken to you about, and I haven't spoken to you, I don't think, about its effect on the perfume industry. And as for this particular ingredient, we're talking about China. I suddenly thought to myself, what about COVID? Now, of course, China suffered particularly heavily from COVID, not only obviously loss of people and so many people being unwell, but also I think its tourism industry suffered massively, its economy suffered massively. Have you found COVID being an effect on the ability to get things like Osmanthus and anything really?
Unfortunately, Darius, no. Because there was such a decrease in the, of course, usage of perfume ingredients, especially natural ones, because fine fragrance, as you know, did suffer much more during the COVID than the detergents. So you see fragrance for detergents, for shower gel, because people were still washing clothes and washing themselves during the COVID. So this kind of category of scented what we call the consumer products category did not suffer as much as fine fragrance, because most of the perfume stores were closed. Even if you still had the online sales, but it decreased a lot. Just like the you see some cosmetics and also makeup.
Well, I suppose makeup products and things like that.
Exactly. So you see, this decrease in sales in fine fragrance had a huge impact on the producers in the countries of origin, because of course they kept a huge stock that they could not sell. Because most of the time when you harvest some plants, you more or less forecast to produce a bit like the year before, or you see a bit more, a bit less, but more or less a stable quantity. And the years of COVID, the sales were close to zero. So it means that people really suffered from this situation and had plenty of stock. So you see, there was not an issue with the supply. I would say this is the opposite that happened, unfortunately.
Yes, but interestingly, I don't know how the business works exactly. You'd kind of think that maybe the materials might have become a little bit cheaper, but what seems to have happened is that perfumes have become so much more expensive in the last.
Yes, you're right. Alors, in terms of prices, you're right, but the increase was, you see, was a lot also as regard the extraction of the plants. One of the key cost impact is the fuel, because you see, when you distill some or extract some products, if you take vetiver, this is you are making a distillation during 12, 18 hours. So you see, the cost of fuel is huge. It's more than 1/3 of the total cost of the essential oil. So you can imagine that the impact is really big. So I would say that, and then you had the labor cost. So the inflation came basically from the energy as regards the plant extraction. And then as regards the full, the perfumes, I would say that there was an issue with also the packaging, the bottles. As you know, the bottles of perfume in glass, use a lot of energy. And there was also the impact of transport. You know that to carry goods from Asia to Europe or from Europe to USA, that's why this company became so rich, Darius. We have here in France one of the world leader, CMA, CGM, which is a very big carrier of these huge boxes you see to transport the goods. The price of a container was multiplied by 10, Darius, by 10,
wow.
Not by 2, by 10. It jumped from to $1,000 or $2,000 to $10,000 and more.
That's serious.
Increase, but maybe more than 10. And this company in France last year, they made a profit that was close to $10 billion, Darius. Okay.
I think maybe we're getting an idea for what one of our future episodes might be: transportation in the on logistics.
For that.
Now, I just want to ask one more question about Osmanthus before we move on. And I'm smelling the absolute here on the blotter, which is just extraordinary. So faceted. You know, if I didn't know that it was Osmanthus, if I hadn't smelled some kind of Osmanthus before, I would absolutely not have been thinking that I'm smelling a flower. But what's really, really interesting, what's really fascinating as well, is its connection with oud. I don't know if you've ever smelt the perfume that Mona Diorio did when she was still alive. I think she made an oud where she kind of looked at the connection between oud and Osmanthus. I guess it's that leathery, dry feel. I don't know. Have other people said to you that?
I need to smell it. I take good note and I will smell it, because Mona Diorio at that time was doing great perfumes.
Yes, I mean, I seem to remember I really liked her vanilla. I thought her oud was interesting. But is Osmanthus used sometimes as well as a kind of pairing with oud?
Oh yeah, you can, of course, because you see, you should ask to a perfumer, Darius. I'm not a perfumer, but I mean, for sure, you have the leathery, the fruity facet that will can be a good accord with oud, of course.
I mean, it's very, very, very strong marked here because it's quite animalic as well, isn't it? The absolute. Okay, perfect.
Tobacco, you have also the cigar facet.
Totally. Those of you watching, folks, I can see the messages coming through, but don't forget, if you've got any questions you would like to put to Remi, feel free. We're going to kind of go thousands of miles the other way now, to much closer to home for you, Remi, because we're going to be talking about Clary Sage. And Clary Sage is an interesting one because we will spend a little bit of time talking about Clary Sage itself, but also what's fascinating about it is that it's used as a kind of base material in the production of other things, which are equally interesting, if not more interesting, in perfumery. So give us the kind of introductory story to Clary Sage. With the case of Clary Sage, we also have an essential oil and an absolute. That's right, isn't it?
Exactly. So Clary Sage is, I would say, a not well-known ingredient in perfumery that I love personally, which is most of the time growing in the same kind of region and places than lavender. You see, I've sent you a picture in Provence where you have the fields which are next one to the other. So it's growing in many countries, Clary Sage, a bit like lavender. Huh? You have Bulgaria, you have even Ukraine, Moldavia, China. You have some region where you have this kind of a bit Mediterranean climate, but the lavender and Clary Sage can resist the freeze, the cold, let's say. So you find it in many countries, even in the USA. Close to the Virginia, South Carolina, you have a Clary Sage, a lot of Clary Sage production. So you see that's a plant that is cultivated in many countries, but I would say that the oil, so the perfumers are using quite a lot the essential oil, a bit like the lavender as an aromatic top note. Alors, you have the aromatic top note and also a bit the leathery note, which is very interesting, and then the absolute. So you see, it's a quite much used ingredient, Clary Sage, mostly in males fragrance traditionally, because you know that I don't like to talk about men and women perfumes, but traditionally this is more in men's perfume. And alors that's a plant that is quite also, the flowers are quite fragile. So you see, and the interesting molecules we are going to talk about, the sclareol, which is inside the plant. These molecules, when you have heavy rains just before the crop, just before the harvesting, it can kill and it can destroy almost totally the harvest. So this is a plant that can suffer really big issues in case of rain, or you see just before the harvesting, it can be a disaster. And some years I've seen a down in production of more than 70%. So you see, you have really to be very careful with this plant. So yes, and we, as lavender, we can produce and use both the essential oil and the absolute. But on the top of that, you have some chemists that discovered, I would say, it's not that old actually, because one of my producer in Switzerland told me that it dates back, because he started there. It dates back, I would say, to maybe 50 years. So you see, around something like that, 50 years.
So is this where you're going to tell us about, for example, what they use the sclareol to make other things?
Yes.
Okay, so let's just pause that for a sec, because I'm just still enjoying smelling this here. Like one of the things that you sent me was what you call your full spectrum, which is, I think, your ultrasound extraction of the
exactly. Alors, here we did a double extraction, so that the first time, basically we did the essential oil, and after we did an extraction using ultrasound of the distillation waste. And then,
so when I smell this, I think to myself, why is this not used more often? Because you're saying it's something that's not used that much in perfumery, but it just smells amazing. It actually smells like, again, not wanting to talk about masculine, feminine, but it almost smells like a more masculine lavender.
Yeah.
In a way. Alors, so why isn't it used more?
Alors, the full spectrum is a new extract. So
okay, it is extraordinary. It is.
Yeah.
But why has it not been used as much as lavender, would you say?
Clary sage, you mean?
Yes, just clary sage.
Yeah, you're right. I don't know, because I really like it a lot, and you should ask to some perfumers, but it's really, and it's not popular, you see, because you have almost as many fields of clary sage as lavender, but nobody talks about clary sage. And you see, the flower is very nice. You've seen it, Dariusz.
Do you know, now that you mention it, I actually thought to myself, I hope Remi doesn't ask me about the flower, because to me, sage is the leaf that we cook and we eat.
No, that's another. This is the officinal sage. This one is the clary sage.
So, good time to ask a question from Gavin. What's the difference between the clary sage and the culinary sage, the cooking sage?
It's the officinal and clary sage. So it's two different botanical species.
Right.
Different.
So totally different species. So
different smell and different.
Okay. So tell us about the flowers then. So does it have like small flowers like lavender?
No, you've seen the flowers. I sent you a picture. It's a beautiful flowers. Like
I can't remember now. I'd have to look. But okay, everybody's now Googling clary sage flowers.
Yes, you probably can find it on Google. It's a beautiful. It's really beautiful. A bit like it has something to a bit like orris. You see, that's a bit the same structure of the flowers. It has a color which is a lighter purple than lavender. You see, lavender is more a deep purple, and the clary sage is a lighter purple, and it's a beautiful flower. So for me, it's even nicer than a lavender field when you see a clary sage field. Much more nicer.
So if you had to describe the difference in smell between the clary sage and the sage that we cook with, what would you say is the?
Alors, I would say that the clary sage is, so it's aromatic like lavender. Lavender is probably a bit more fruity and powdery. When clary sage, when you go a bit to the evaporation, you will have this kind of a leathery facet, a little bit animalic as well. So you see, it's then it's deriving to some different smells, but both belong, the essential oil, to the aromatic family.
I was wondering whether you would say that clary sage is a bit more green, because it feels a bit more green to me.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah,
you're
it's
right.
I think sharper.
Yeah,
Sharper, more green.
exactly. Because
Yeah,
you
maybe
have more
woodier.
acetyl and linalool in lavender, which you see makes it a bit more fruity, a bit more. Yeah, you're right. It's sharper, clary sage.
Sharper, maybe darker. I mean, I don't even know if there is much clary sage in the old, Chanel pour Monsieur, but I always associate Chanel pour Monsieur, the old one, with a kind of sage note. I don't know. Okay, so we've got the clary sage, and it's growing in the beautiful fields, and people don't use it as much as they should. But you were saying that it was about 50 years ago that some clever scientists thought that they could do something with the clary sage. So tell us about that.
Yeah, exactly. So you see, the chemist did their homework, and they found an interesting molecule that was highly present, because basically when chemists make the research, I mean about synthetics, about organic chemistry. So they are studying the molecules and how they could, depending on the orientation in space, you see how it could be combined between the carbon and the hydrogen and the oxygen connection to make the smell. So, okay. And then one day they fall on molecules, and they came to sclareol, and they said, okay, can we find, because most of the time you try to find, especially at that time, a plant that will contain a high percentage of sclareol. And fortunately, in clary sage, you have 50% of sclareol. Very nice.
Right. So it almost like they went backwards. First, they decided they wanted to find a source of sclareol, and then they identified sage as the source of the sclareol.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
That's how it works. Because when you identify an interesting molecule, you always try to look in nature if you have some resources that will have a high percentage of this interesting molecule, to try to capture it and isolate. You see this molecule.
And why was sclareol interesting? Just because they liked the smell of it, and they thought it would be stable and useful? And
it was at the time where people were making this research also on the animalic ingredients. There was the story around ambergris that was less and less used because it was difficult to find, because the perfumery became a big industry that was not using this kind of rare product. And they try to find a kind of alternate, or at least to enrich the perfumer's palette with some ambery, a bit animalic ambery, long-lasting molecules. And sclareol was a good candidate. Enfin, not sclareol as such, but it was the good starting material to get to ambrofix or ambroxan or whatever commercial name, because now several big fragrance houses are producing these molecules. And
so, Remy, in a way that somebody like me would understand, what do they do? What do they do? Is it,
the process? So the process, basically, you take the clary sage, you make a concrete. So this is the first extraction step. This concrete, so it's a solvent extraction with hexane. This concrete will contain more or less 50% of sclareol.
Right.
And then you isolate the sclareol, and then you have more complex chemistry with 2 different steps to go until I would say, refined molecules. That is called ambrox, ambrofix, ambroxan, whatever the name that you have here that you can smell.
Well, yes, you've given me one. You've sent me one called with it. You've labeled ambrox, but even though they have different names in all of the different companies, are they basically the same thing?
Yeah, more or less. You have Firmenich has developed a different process to get to a product that they call cetalox. You see, cetalox from cetacé and from ambergris. You see, so still keeping in mind this kind of idea that they will come to something close to ambergris, which is not at all the case, because
am I right that I think in the notes you sent me you said that Cetalox,
yeah,
which by the way, if people want to smell, apparently Cetalox is what's used in Juliette Has a Gun's Not a Perfume. Apparently that, I think it's Cetalox. But I think you told me in the notes that that does not come from Clary Sage.
No. Then you have some different chemical routes. You see where you start from a different feedstock and making a different chemistry and coming to a product, but which belongs to the same olfactive family.
Okay. So then what? Was there like a kind of mini explosion in the perfume industry where suddenly people thought, oh my goodness, this is amazing? What, because
Yes.
it's...
Yes. It became a huge product. Why? Because first, it was very much used in detergent and household, because these molecules that you can smell, that you have, is very, very long lasting. And when you make fragrance for softeners, laundry detergent, and all that stuff, which is huge volumes, you can imagine for Procter and Gamble, Unilever, and this kind of guys, it really make this molecule very big. It is also used in fine fragrances, of course, but in much smaller volume. But what made the success of these molecules is really the usage into fragrance formulation for detergents.
Right. And so, I don't know if you can put a figure on this, but of all of the Clary Sage that's grown in the world, most, if it's used in the perfume industry, is most of it actually for all of these things like ambroxan and ambrofix and things like that?
Definitely.
Right.
Probably we are talking about a huge volume and acreage. So I would say that probably 70 or 80% of the global production is for these molecules, not for the essential oil and the absolute.
And what's your thinking as well? Because I clearly, when people were making them with these names that they gave it and everything, they thought that it would be a kind of substitute, as you said, for ambergris. And I can kind of see a sort of connection, but not much of a connection.
No.
Why did they immediately jump on that and think that this was going to be?
Because, first, because they could not afford anymore to use ambergris, because you see it became the fragrance went cheaper and cheaper. So, and second, because they found some common molecules in both.
Okay.
But when you smell it, it has nothing to do. That's always the problem, is that you can absolutely not compare ambergris to one of these these molecules. But there is quite far, but similarity, and that's what they could do best, to have something cheap and more or less, you see, looking like this is a pale copy, but this is a bit a copy from far of what ambergris could smell. But you see, it's you are not there. You can smell it.
Well, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because it's almost become one of those things where when people smell vanillin, they think they're smelling vanilla, and then they kind of don't like the smell of vanilla. And this is a similar kind of thing. People smell ambroxan and they think they're smelling ambergris.
No. You see, Darius, it's very easy to explain. I'm not a chemist, but it's easy to understand. If you take vanilla, in vanilla you have maybe 300 different molecules. Vanillin is one of them. So you can imagine that the complexity of you are very far from there. And that the same for this kind of molecules. Ambergris is so complex when you study in the chromatography the chemical profile and the different molecules. This is so it's just like if you say I don't know, to give a comparison, if you say yeah, I've seen a green car, and from the color you can define the car, but no, you have the wheel, you have the engine, you have the
No, I know what you mean.
You
But
see,
these smells like ambroxan, like ambrofix, all of those ones that you mentioned. I think we can say that to a huge extent in perfumery, they have become like the smells of the last 25 years, if not more, if not more.
yes, of course.
What's your personal explanation for that? I mean, it must be because on some level they're also affordable for people to use, even
Exactly.
though we're also always told that, for example, ambroxan is quite expensive.
Yeah. Alors, now it's no, it's a few hundred euro a kilo, so it's quite cheap. But you see, you're right, because it's just like if you talk about cologne, you see that was these molecules
Yeah.
very trendy 25 years ago that gave birth to the marine perfumes.
Yes.
Bon, cologne. So it's a trend, and cologne today is really less used. It's still used a lot in a household or let's say consumer products or cheap perfume, but it was a big trend. And I think ambrox, or when there is a new molecules, or maltol, you see for Angel, maltol and ethyl maltol, which are these molecules that smell a bit caramel, and
Yes.
people use it as a new trend, like in fashion, as a new fabric that you could have to make a dress or a suit. And that's a source of inspiration for the perfumers, and it becomes trendy. And then you have a lot of perfumes that are inspired by that. Bon, there is another reason, Darius, is that today, as the perfume have less and less qualitative ingredients, to make a good quality price now, the principle is to make a powerful perfume. So you see, you are these molecules are like a bit like oud accord, because most of the oud accord, as you know, that was very trendy, do not contain any oud. But you have all these woody molecules, and ambroxan or ambrox are part of them, to make very powerful perfume. You see that will have a lot of long lastingness. Alors, lose, of course, in aesthetic, because this is not aesthetic at all, to my opinion, to my really my own opinion. But yes, this is the search and the quest for power, for long lasting perfumes, to the detrimental to the, I think, to the aesthetic, to the sophistication, to something, you see, that would be. So that's why, that's also explained the success of these molecules, that like maltol and ethyl maltol. Now in the perfume you smell always the fruits, the sugar, and the wood. With the wood, you see, with the woody trend, this kind of ambery and perfume that are, for me, a bit too much. But
too much. No, because it's interesting. I always say, and I'm sure perfumers would agree, that there is room for all materials in the palette. I'm smelling the ambrox now, and I think as a material, it's beautiful, it's fascinating, it's interesting. But I guess the trouble is that it's just overused. I'd like to take a couple of questions because we are running out of time. In a kind of general way, Remi, now that we've been talking about, these materials for so many months, going literally across the world, I think we visited every part of the world in our journey. Rachel is saying, what can we do? How can we change the incentives within the oil production houses to produce a culture of using more naturals and protecting the supply chain through actually purchasing more naturals regularly? So what, if anything, could we do? What would you, for example, what's the one piece of advice you would give to people to do? Thanks for the question.
Yeah, I will answer very frankly. Unfortunately, I'm quite pessimistic, because the business models of these companies, last time, I will not quote the company. In fact, it was a perfume brand, a major big perfume brand. And there was a guy in the, communication about the ethical, I don't know what, in the company, that made a kind of announcement. Bon.
Right.
I read the speech. It was only bullshit, you see, with very general terms. I could not understand what was behind that. And I think, unfortunately, these companies, they make money. They are in a business model of trying to expand everywhere in the world to make volumes, because this is a business model based on price and volume, and they will not change. So they will not change. So what you need to do if you want to push some different, I would say you need to help and to support small companies that try to have a different business model. I don't know. I don't only talk about us, because we have a very strong bias to this, and Darius know that. It's really our DNA. There are also other players, but try to find and to identify small companies, small perfume brands that will change the system. The big will never, unfortunately, change the system. And I think this is true in all the business areas. The change and the revolution will come from small players with very strong focus and the philosophy that will not be, unfortunately, always only looking and running after dollars, but with a real, you see, opinion and love of and passion in what they do. What the way we try to act, because but yes, for me, you need to support some small players if you want to change things, and to support a different perfumery.
And I know that I think a while ago when I asked you a similar question, but we didn't have time to get into it, when I asked you what you think the biggest challenge is facing the production of natural materials at the moment, actually you said it was climate change.
Yeah, climate change. Yeah, of course, and also the fact that I'm very worrying now about the regulatory aspect. You see, it came into all the protests with farmers we had in France, but I think it will kill the farmers, because today the farmers everywhere in the world are asked by this big company, the giant company, the big perfume house, the big brands, about documents, tons of documents, and the result is that they cannot anymore work directly with these people. They need some middlemen and traders to fill in these paperwork, because today the farmer would spend 80% of his time to fill in some very complicated documents about whatever regulation, the fact that they do not employ child, the fact that it's very nice, but you see, it's really a waste, because the companies are hiding themselves behind this kind of documentation and regulation. And the sad thing behind that is that their buyers, who are in contact and who should be in contact with this producer in the countries of origin, they don't travel anymore, and they don't travel enough to really understand the constraints and the problems of these people and these farmers. And for me, this is a very big challenge also in the years to come, because it comes now to a level that you could not imagine.
In your opinion, what are the countries or the regions around the world which are doing this well, which are really thinking about the future, and which are really thinking about sustainability in a meaningful way? Or are there any countries or regions?
But I would say that Brazil, before Bolsonaro and after Bolsonaro, they had a really an interesting policy as regard the protection of Amazonia, even if it was not perfect, but also you see the protocol of Nagoya, sharing the profit between the indigenous community, when some companies were coming there and exploiting some interesting plants to share the profit and to make sure that there was no piracy behind that. So for me, this is one country where I've been, where I've seen well-structured policy, especially for the wild plants, I would say. But now you see, I think it's when we talk about the cultivation and the farming model, I think the farmers are a bit lost everywhere when we talk about the small or medium farmer size, because they face more and more risk, because it's very risky to be a farmer today with all the increased climatic change. I think also all the big players, there is no long-term vision about the supply and the purchase. So there is no plan for the farmers to know if they will have to deliver 1 kg or 10 kg next year, but they still need to invest to plant and to grow the botanical. So that becomes more and more difficult, and it's I think it's a small thing. So it's to try to talk about it and to really to give a voice. And I think with Dariush, this is what we try to do also through this masterclass. It's to raise awareness about the consumer, because at the end of the day, that's always the consumer who buy the perfume that will have the power to say, I want to buy this brand, but I will not buy this brand because I know what's going on and what's behind the scene. So this is our responsibility to disclose what nobody discloses in this industry, because everything is secret, and the people they don't talk, especially among the big players and the big brands.
And it is genuinely complicated, because you can't always even use price as a factor, can you? I mean, you know that if something is very, very cheap, then probably it is literally cheap, or maybe somebody has been exploited in the making of it. But just because something is expensive doesn't mean that nobody has been exploited in the making of it. That it is very, very, very complicated.
And I think this is the positive things with the forum, your channel, about the social network, is that the people now can have, I think, more transparency and can find more information about what's going on than 10 or 20 years ago. And for me, this is something very positive, because you see, 20 years ago, Dariush, we could not have a voice among the big boys and the big players, because first, the small and niche perfumery did not exist. And so that's something for me, which is a very positive among some negative side, a very positive aspect that we need really to cultivate and to emphasize on, to speak and to talk and to explain all this.
Okay, so on that quite serious note, but I think appropriately serious note, I'm going to say thank you very much to everybody for watching, not just this episode, but all of the episodes in the masterclass series so far. And a huge, huge, huge thank you to you, Remi, for doing this just completely generously. You know, Remi, I think I've said this before, but Remi has absolutely not asked for anything in return. We've just had this as a way of extending the conversations that we've had over the last couple of years together. And the conversation will continue. We will come up with a different form. We will come up with other things to talk about. I mean, I think it does sound like we could definitely have a whole episode about logistics. So I'm sure that in some shape or form, Remi will be back before too long. But until then, all the very best to you, Remi. I know that you will keep us informed as well about new releases from your brand. And to all of you watching, thanks again, and stay tuned to social media for details of more episodes coming your way. Until then, bye.
Thanks, Persolaise. We love you.